Easter Sunday broke warm and clear, but nothing about that day felt light. I stood just outside the sliding glass doors of the Calloway family home, holding a tray of sweet potato casserole I'd made from Marcus's recipe. Inside, laughter bounced off the walls as the long dining table filled with cousins, uncles, and second wives. My daughter Bella had already run inside, clutching the little pink bunny she'd been sleeping with since her dad died. I followed her in, smiling, trying to tell myself that today would be different, that maybe Judith would make space for me at the table, that maybe for once she'd see me as more than the woman her son married. But as I stepped into the dining room, Judith turned toward me. Her eyes, cold and always calculating, landed on the casserole dish first, then on me. "You can put that in the kitchen," she said. Her tone was casual, like someone ordering a waitress. I hesitated. "Where should I sit?" She raised an eyebrow. "We're full at the table." I looked around. There were clearly empty chairs. 2, in fact. She saw me notice. Judith's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "You can sit out on the porch. It's a lovely day." I didn't say anything at first. Not because I didn't have anything to say, but because I knew none of it would matter. Bella was standing at the far end of the table next to her cousin, watching me. "Mama," she asked, her voice too small for the room, "why can't you sit with us?" The room fell quiet. Judith turned to her with the same forced smile. "Because," she said clearly, loud enough for every single person to hear, "she's not part of this family." It hit like a slap. Not just the words, but the way no one disagreed. Plates clinked. Someone cleared their throat. Marcus's sister looked down at her lap. Bella's face crumpled. She started to cry, her little hands clutching the back of a chair. I took a step forward, but Judith moved between us. "You're making a scene," she hissed under her breath. "This is a family meal. Go sit outside before you ruin it for everyone." I wanted to scream. Instead, I knelt down to Bella's level and wiped her cheeks. "It's okay, baby," I whispered. "I'll be right outside. We'll have our own little party after, all right?" She nodded, sniffling. Her tiny voice trembled. "I want to eat with you." And then came the sound no one expected. The front door opened, heavy and deliberate. A pair of boots echoed through the foyer. Every conversation stopped. Into the dining room stepped Officer Thomas Neely in full uniform. He held a folder in one hand and a look on his face I hadn't seen in years, serious, calm, and purposeful. Judith stepped back, blinking. "Thomas, what are you doing here?" He nodded politely but didn't answer her. Instead, he turned to me. "Alina," he said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "do you want to do this now?" I stood up straight. "Yes, please." He opened the folder and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "This house," he said, glancing around, "is no longer in the name of Judith Calloway. Marcus Calloway transferred full ownership to his wife, Alina Rivera, 2 weeks before his death." You could feel the air vanish from the room. He left this house to her and his daughter to make sure they would never have to beg for space at their own table. A fork clattered to the floor, then a plate, then another. Every face in the room turned to me, but I didn't look at them. I looked at Bella. She smiled through her tears. And I finally walked past Judith and took my seat. After Marcus died, everything felt like it collapsed in slow motion. The house we'd been renting was sold 2 months later. The landlord apologized like it made a difference. My hospital schedule got cut when budget changes slashed our unit. Bella had just turned 5. I remember holding her tiny backpack while she slept on the couch, wondering how I was going to explain to her that we didn't have a home anymore. That's when Judith offered us a room in her house. "We'll take care of you," she'd said, standing on the porch in that pressed cream blouse she always wore on Sundays. It's what Marcus would have wanted. At the time, I wanted to believe her. I was too tired to question it. We moved into the upstairs guest room, 1 bed, 1 closet, 1 shared bathroom with a broken lock. Judith made it clear from the beginning that we were guests. That word echoed in everything she did. She labeled food in the fridge, rearranged our laundry on the line, corrected the way I folded towels. She never raised her voice, never slammed a door. But every look, every breath, every passive-aggressive smile reminded me that I didn't belong. Marcus had been the glue. He was loud where I was quiet, warm where I was guarded. He knew how to navigate his mother's moods, how to change the subject when she started picking apart my parenting or the way I dressed Bella. I used to watch him from across the room and think, God, he makes this all look so easy. Without him, I was just another unwelcome presence. At first, I tried to make peace. I kept things clean. I volunteered to cook. I took night shifts to avoid being home too much. But it didn't matter. Judith always found a way to remind me that I wasn't part of her family. There were moments that chipped at me, slowly. The time Bella brought home a handmade Mother's Day card, and Judith said, she probably meant to give that to her teacher, not you. Or the Christmas morning she gave Bella a brand new bike, but handed me a re-gifted mug with chipped paint. Or when I tried to hang up a photo of Marcus and me in the hallway and found it in the donation box the next day. Still, I told myself to be strong. For Bella. Bella adored her grandma in the way little kids do when they don't yet see the undercurrents. She'd curl up in Judith's lap to hear stories and run to her with scraped knees. I never stopped her. I didn't want Bella to lose more family, but even at 7, she could sense it. She once asked me, "Did Grandma love Daddy more than you?" I just smiled and tucked her in. What could I say? I didn't want to fight. I wanted peace. I wanted a roof over my daughter's head. I wanted stability. I wanted to believe that Judith's cruelty was just grief in a different mask. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. She didn't like that Marcus married someone like me. She never said it directly, but I didn't have to hear the words. The digs were subtle but sharp. About my accent, even though I was born in Georgia, about my people skills when I didn't laugh at the right jokes, about how some women rush into motherhood before they're ready. And I knew she hated that Marcus left the military and stayed home for Bella's first year instead of following his promotion. Judith had plans for him. I was the detour, so Easter was supposed to be my olive branch. I pulled out Marcus's old recipe box the night before and cooked his favorite dishes. Candied yams, maple roasted carrots, cornbread dressing with sage. Bella helped. She wore her little apron and said, "Daddy would be proud of us." I thought maybe, just maybe, showing up like that, participating, giving, honoring Marcus, would let Judith see me as something more than an obligation. I never imagined it would be the day she cut me off completely. I never imagined Bella would cry in front of 20 people. And I definitely never imagined that the house I was living in, the house I was told I didn't belong to, was already mine. That Easter morning, I woke up early to the sound of Bella humming in the hallway. She'd already laid out her little yellow dress, the one with the tiny daisies on the collar. It used to be too big on her. Now it fit just right. I packed everything into foil pans and covered them carefully. Candied yams, cornbread dressing, the deviled eggs I'd piped like Marcus used to. Bella danced around the kitchen in her socks while I double-checked the casserole. I even found the old napkin rings Marcus made in high school woodshop. I brought them out, thinking maybe this time Judith would see the effort. Maybe she'd smile and say thank you. We pulled into the driveway just after 11. Judith's yard looked like something out of a magazine, freshly cut grass, flower beds blooming with purple and gold. The front door was wide open, laughter already floating out. I carried the food with both arms. Bella skipped ahead with her bunny tucked under her arm, waving to her cousins as they played tag around the tree. The front hallway smelled like honey ham and lemon polish. I followed Bella into the dining room, smiling, already feeling like maybe, just maybe, we were going to have a good day. Judith saw me first. She didn't smile. "You're late," she said, even though we weren't. "Everyone's already seated." I held out the casserole. "I brought the yams," Marcus's recipe. She looked at the dish like it had insulted her. "You can leave that in the kitchen," she said. My smile faltered. Should I put it on the table? Her lips tightened. "There's no room." I glanced around. There were clearly 2 open seats. I opened my mouth to speak, but she didn't let me. "You can sit outside," she said, then raised her voice. "It's a beautiful day. Fresh air will do you good." Bella looked up from her cousin's side and frowned. "Why can't Mommy sit with us?" Judith's voice was calm, calculated, "because she's not part of this family." Every sound in the room dropped out. Forks hovered in midair. Conversation froze. My heart slammed against my ribs so loud I thought they could hear it. I stared at Judith, willing her to take it back, to say she was joking or that I misunderstood. But she didn't blink. She looked proud. I bent down to Bella's level. "It's okay, honey. I'll be right outside, all right?" Bella's eyes filled with tears. "I want you to sit with me." "I know, baby," I said, kissing her forehead. "I know." Judith folded her arms. "Don't start drama, Alina. This is a holiday." I stood up. My hands shook, but I refused to cry. Not in front of her. Not in front of people who looked the other way while she sliced me down in broad daylight. I walked out to the porch and sat in the wicker chair Marcus and I used to sit on when Bella was a baby. I could still hear the echo of her baby giggles, the way Marcus used to hold her up to the wind chimes and make her laugh. From inside, the clatter of plates and silverware resumed. Judith's voice carried above the others, cheery and bright, as if nothing had happened. I sat there alone, staring at the tray of food no one would touch, and that's when the letter came back to me. A week earlier, I had found it in Bella's memory box, a sealed envelope with my name written in Marcus's handwriting. It had been given to Officer Thomas Neely, a family friend, with instructions to deliver it a year after Marcus's death. The envelope had been there all along, tucked between Bella's drawings and old report cards. Inside was a deed transfer. Marcus had signed over full ownership of the house to me. The paperwork was final, legal, filed, signed. He had done it without telling anyone, not even Judith. The letter said, "I know my mother. If anything happens to me, I want you and Bella to be safe, to never feel like you have to beg for space. This house is yours. It always should have been." I hadn't told anyone. I didn't know what to do with that kind of power. But sitting on that porch, listening to Bella cry inside while Judith carved ham like nothing had happened, I knew what I had to do. I stood up and took out my phone. I dialed the number from the letter. "Officer Neely," I said, "are you free this afternoon?" His voice was steady. "I'm always free for Marcus's family." "Good," I said, "because I'm ready." I sat on the porch for a long time after that call. The birds kept singing like nothing had happened. The wind played gently with the hem of my dress. I stared down at the tray of untouched food sitting beside me and thought about how many times I'd swallowed my pride to keep the peace, how many times I'd told myself that biting my tongue was the mature thing to do, the strong thing, the for Bella thing. But that day wasn't about strength anymore. It was about dignity. Inside, I could still hear Bella crying. And I knew this wasn't just about me. It never had been. It was about what Bella was learning to expect from the world, what she was being taught about her worth by watching how I let people treat me. And I wasn't going to let her think this was normal. I picked up my phone again just to make sure I hadn't imagined the earlier conversation. I opened the folder app where I'd scanned the deed Marcus left behind. His signature was still right there on the bottom, clean, steady, unmistakably his. I could practically hear his voice in my head. "I'm not here anymore, so I need to make sure you're protected." When Officer Neely arrived, he knocked quietly. He wasn't in full uniform yet, just a windbreaker and jeans. He looked around cautiously, as if he already knew what kind of fire he was walking into. "Are you sure you're ready to do this today?" he asked, holding the folder under his arm. "Yes," I said. "Today is the day she made my daughter cry in front of 20 people. If I wait, I'll lose my nerve, and she'll never stop." He nodded once. "Let me go change." I watched him walk back to his car, where he kept his official gear in the trunk. I could see the glint of his badge as he clipped it onto his belt. My heart was pounding, but for the first time in a long time, it wasn't from fear. It was from clarity. I stepped back into the house through the side door. No one noticed me. The clinking of glasses and the rise and fall of laughter sounded strange now, distant and hollow, like a party I'd never really been invited to. I found Bella in the hallway, her face streaked with tears. She reached for me immediately, and I pulled her close. "Are we leaving?" she asked softly. I held her tight. "No, baby, we're not going anywhere." We waited together in the hallway. I smoothed down her curls, kissed the top of her head, and whispered, "There's something I want you to see." Then, as if the universe had been waiting for this moment, the front door opened. Officer Neely stepped inside in full uniform. The chatter in the dining room stopped. You could feel the shift in the air. Judith was the first to speak. She rose slowly from her seat, eyes wide. "Thomas, is everything all right?" "I'm here to speak with Alina," he said, glancing toward the hallway. I stepped forward. Every eye turned to me. Judith looked between us, suspicion growing on her face. "What's going on?" "I think you should all hear this," I said, my voice steady. "It concerns this house." Judith's tone sharpened. "What are you talking about? This is my house." Officer Neely opened the folder and pulled out a thick stack of papers. "Actually, it's not." He laid the documents on the table. "Marcus transferred ownership of this house to Alina Rivera 2 weeks before his death. The title, the deed, and the will all confirm it. This is legally her property." Silence. Someone dropped a fork. A cousin gasped. Judith took a step back, her face pale. "What?" she whispered. "He did it to protect his wife and daughter," Neely said firmly, "to make sure they were safe, to make sure no one could ever tell them they didn't belong." I looked at Bella. She was staring at me like I was a superhero. I turned back to Judith. "For 2 years, I let you treat me like a stray you were forced to feed," I said. "I told myself it was for Bella, that I didn't want conflict, but you made it clear today you never saw me as part of this family, and now you never have to pretend again." Judith's mouth opened, but no words came out. I picked up the deed from the table and held it in both hands. "I'm not going to sit outside anymore." And then I walked Bella to the head of the table and pulled out a chair. For a few seconds, no one moved. The air in the dining room felt thick, heavy with something unspoken that had finally been forced into the light. Judith's mouth hung slightly open, her hand still frozen on the back of her chair. You could practically hear the sound of pride cracking in her chest. I didn't sit down right away. I stood there holding the folder with Marcus's signature in my hands and let it sink in. For them. For me, for Bella, because this wasn't just about property or legal documents. This wasn't about paperwork. It was about truth. It was about every moment I'd spent tiptoeing through a house I didn't feel welcome in, every time I swallowed hurt for the sake of peace, every time Bella looked up at me with confusion in her eyes, unsure why her mother was always just outside the circle. Now there was no denying it. I wasn't just part of this family. I was the woman Marcus trusted above all else, the one he chose to protect, even in death. And this house? It was mine. I took a deep breath and walked slowly to the head of the table, where the empty chair had been left for Judith. Without asking, I pulled it out for Bella. She looked up at me with big, tear-glazed eyes. I gave her a little nod, and she climbed up like she belonged there, because she did. I turned back to the room. "I didn't come here today to start a war," I said, voice calm but loud enough for everyone to hear. "But I won't be dismissed anymore. I won't be told where I can sit or what I'm worth, not in the house my husband left for me, not in front of my daughter." No one spoke. Judith finally blinked, her voice brittle and sharp. "You've been living under my roof for 2 years. I opened my home to you." "No," I replied, holding her gaze. "You lived under the illusion that it was still yours. But Marcus made a different choice. He made it quietly, legally, without drama, because he knew what would happen if he told you." She turned to Officer Neely. "This can't be right. There must be a mistake." "There's no mistake," he said plainly. "It's all been recorded and filed. You can contest it in court, but you won't win." Judith's face turned from confusion to something colder, wounded pride lashing out. "So this is your plan? To humiliate me? To embarrass me in front of my own family?" "No," I said. "You did that yourself when you told a grieving woman she didn't belong. You did that when you made a child cry at a holiday table. I'm just finally telling the truth." Behind her, Marcus's sister, Leanne, stood slowly and stepped toward me. She'd always been quiet, never really picking sides, but now her eyes were wet. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I'm sorry." I nodded. "Thank you." The rest of the room was still. You could feel the weight of it, shame, disbelief, the realization that something deep had shifted, permanently. Then came the sound that marked the end of the old order. Judith pushed back her chair too quickly. It scraped against the hardwood. She grabbed her purse, her keys, and walked out of the room without saying another word. And then, the second sound. The front door slammed shut. Officer Neely looked at me and gave a small nod, like a soldier completing his mission. I'll follow up with the legal filings this week, he said quietly. Let me know if she tries to come back. Thank you, I said. As he left, the energy in the room slowly began to shift, like someone had finally opened a window after years of still air. I sat down beside Bella, and she leaned against me, her head on my arm. "Can we have your yams now?" she whispered. I smiled for the first time all day. "We sure can." I stood and went to the kitchen, carrying the tray that had sat untouched. I brought it back and placed it on the table like it was the centerpiece. People started passing it around, slowly at first, then with quiet chatter resuming. A small cousin reached for a spoon. Marcus's aunt complimented the seasoning. The room thawed bit by bit, and for the first time in years, I felt it too. Warmth, belonging, peace. In the days that followed, the house felt different. It wasn't just the absence of Judith's footsteps or her passive-aggressive sighs echoing through the halls. It was the stillness. The kind of stillness that doesn't make you tense up, but lets you exhale. For the first time since Marcus died, I felt safe in my own space. I didn't have to tiptoe in the kitchen. I didn't have to justify my presence in a house that already belonged to me. And Bella, she noticed it too. She smiled more, slept deeper, woke up humming again. We took down Judith's floral curtains and let the sunlight flood in. We boxed up her glass figurines and filled the shelves with Bella's drawings, picture books, and a few photos of Marcus and me from our early years, ones Judith used to say were too casual to display. I even put up the picture she had tried to throw out, the one of us holding Bella in the hospital, exhausted and happy and completely unprepared for everything life would throw at us. It felt right, finally. Judith didn't return, not even to gather her things. Her lawyer contacted Officer Neely once, tried to probe about the transfer, but Neely was firm. Airtight. She knew it, too. She was just hoping for some technicality. There wasn't one. Eventually, a moving truck pulled up. I let them in and left the front door open, not saying a word. They packed her things in boxes with her initials on the side. When they left, I stood in the doorway and watched the truck disappear down the road like a chapter closing. That night, I sat on the couch while Bella played on the floor. She was making a pretend Easter dinner with her dolls. She laid out napkins, set plastic plates, and gave every guest a seat. Then she looked up and said, "Mommy, you get the big chair because it's your house." I smiled, tears burning in the corners of my eyes. "You're right," I said. "It is." She paused, looking thoughtful. "Is Grandma mad at us?" I looked at her carefully. "I think Grandma is sad. And when people are sad, sometimes they act like they're angry. But it's not your fault or mine, and it's not our job to carry it." She nodded slowly, as if absorbing something heavier than her age could explain. Then she picked up her bunny, gave it a kiss, and went back to arranging the table. That Easter became the last one we spent with Judith, but it was also the first one that felt real. A year later, we hosted again, but this time, the house was full of people who saw us. My sister drove in from Atlanta. My best friend Talia brought her husband and their 2 kids. Even Marcus's cousin Andre came, with his famously awful potato salad and a big smile that filled the room. And when Bella passed around her homemade place cards with glitter and stickers, she gave me one that said, "Queen of the House." Everyone laughed, but I felt that title deep in my chest, because I'd learned something important. Sometimes peace doesn't come from keeping quiet. Sometimes peace comes when you finally speak the truth that's been sitting in your chest, growing heavier by the day. I had spent 2 years trying to earn a seat at a table that Marcus had already given me. I kept trying to prove myself to people who decided long ago they didn't want to see me. But the thing is, belonging isn't something you win by being smaller. It's something you claim by standing tall. And Marcus knew that. That's why he left me the house. He knew his mother would try to erase me, but he also knew I wouldn't let her. And now, every wall I repaint, every corner I clean, every laugh that fills this house, it all feels like a tribute to the life we were building before everything changed, to the life I'm still building, with Bella, every single day. This house isn't just where we live. It's where we healed, where we stood up for ourselves, where we chose to stop surviving and start living. If this story touched you or made you think about the quiet strength we carry just to survive some days, like the video, it means more than you know. If you've ever been made to feel like you didn't belong in your own life, your own family, your own skin, share this story. Someone out there needs to hear it today. Drop a comment below and tell me, have you ever had to stand up for yourself in a moment when it was easier to stay silent? I read everyone, and your voice matters here. And if you believe in real stories, the messy kind, the healing kind, the kind that make you feel less alone, subscribe to the channel. We're building something honest here, one truth at a time. Thanks for listening. We'll talk again soon. At the family reunion, they placed me and my daughter at a separate table, away from everyone else. No greetings, no hugs, no seats saved for us. Just two folding chairs near the kitchen, like we didn't belong. My daughter looked around, confused. I gave her a small smile and said it was fine. It wasn't. We had barely taken our seats when my niece leaned over to another cousin and whispered, just loud enough for us to hear, "She's not a real cousin anyway." My daughter heard it. Her back straightened. Her lips tightened. I stayed quiet, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't want to make a scene in front of her. But Alara stood up. She pulled something out of her little purse, a photo I hadn't seen in years. She walked across the room, her steps soft but certain. Then, in the middle of everyone, she held up the photo with both hands and said, "This is my dad. His name was Derek Vaughn. He used to own this house." Everything stopped. Conversations ended mid-sentence. Silverware paused in mid-air. No one said a word. The air in the room shifted, and in that moment, my daughter, the one they tried to push aside, became the only person anyone could see. My name is Soraya Vaughn. I'm 38, a single mom, and if I'm being honest, I've spent most of my adult life staying out of family affairs. Not because I wanted to, but because I learned early on that not every door with your last name on it leads to a place that feels like home. My daughter, Alara, is 11. She's got this calm confidence about her, like she already knows who she is and doesn't need the world to validate it. But she also has this hunger for connection, for stories, for pieces of her life that I've kept tucked away, especially when it comes to her father. Derek, her dad, was everything I never knew I needed. He was warm, loyal, and the only man I've ever met who didn't make me feel like I had to earn love. We weren't married when he died. We were young, figuring things out, making plans that we never got the chance to finish. He was gone in an instant. A car accident, early winter, on his way home from work. I was 3 months pregnant. Just like that, the life we were building shattered. After Derek passed, his side of the family pulled away. There were no cruel words, no drama, just silence. At first, I chalked it up to grief. Everyone mourns differently. But then, the weeks turned into months, and the months into years. Invitations stopped. Phone calls went unanswered. It became clear I was no longer considered part of the Vaughn family. I never told Alara much about that. I gave her the good pieces of him, the stories about how he'd talk to her belly before bed, how he'd already picked out her name. I showed her photos, let her ask questions, kept his memory soft and golden. I wanted her to know the love, not the loss. So when a formal, glossy invitation showed up in the mail with gold lettering that read, "Vaughn Family Reunion, hosted at the family estate," I didn't know what to make of it. It was from Aunt Marlene, Derek's aunt, the family's unofficial matriarch. I hadn't heard her voice in over a decade. At first, I didn't plan on going. I left the envelope on the kitchen table, unopened for days. But Alara found it. She read it twice before looking up at me with her wide, curious eyes. "Do they want to meet me?" she asked. That question hit harder than I expected. I didn't know the answer, but I didn't want her growing up wondering if she was ever meant to be part of something bigger, if she was forgotten, if she was rejected before she had the chance to show them who she was. So I said yes. We drove out that Saturday morning. It was a long ride through winding roads and changing trees. I hadn't seen the old Vaughn house in years, but it hadn't changed. White paint, wraparound porch, that tall oak tree in the front yard that Derek used to climb when he was a kid. As soon as we pulled into the driveway, Alara whispered, "Wow, this is where he lived?" I nodded. "This is where he grew up, where we first met. He took me to prom from that front door." She smiled, holding on to every word like a gift. It It was a big moment for her. I could feel it. When we walked in, it was like stepping into a past life. The hall smelled like old wood and lemon polish. Photos lined the walls, faces I remembered and some I barely recognized. A few people turned to look, offered small nods, but no one jumped up to say hello. No one wrapped us in a warm welcome. It was polite, distant, and awkward. We were directed, to a smaller table off to the side of the dining room. All the name cards were already laid out. There were rows of seats for every branch of the family tree, carefully arranged like a seating chart at a wedding. But for me and Alara, there was a card that simply read guests. That word stung. Guest, not family, not Vaughn. We sat down and I tried to smile for Alara's sake. I made jokes about our private table, about how it was closer to the dessert tray. She laughed, but I could see the flicker of confusion in her eyes. She was paying attention, and then it happened. Maris, my niece, Lila's daughter, leaned toward another cousin and said with a smirk, "She's not a real cousin anyway." Alara's face dropped. She didn't cry, she didn't flinch. She just looked at me, waiting for something, maybe a reaction, maybe a defense. I stayed silent, and that silence would be the last moment I got to protect her from the truth. The room was alive with laughter and conversations, but none of it reached our table. From the outside, it probably looked like a happy family reunion, long-lost cousins catching up, aunts passing around casseroles, kids playing tag outside. But from where we sat, it felt like a stage we weren't invited to step on. Alara stirred the ice in her lemonade with her straw. She hadn't said much since we sat down. Every now and then, she looked over at the main table, where cousins her age were passing plates and telling stories, occasionally bursting into laughter that felt too loud, too deliberate. I tried to keep the mood light. "You want to walk around the yard later? I think there's still a swing set in the back." She nodded politely. "Maybe after lunch." But I could see it all over her face. She didn't want to be polite. She wanted to be included. She wanted someone to wave her over and ask where she was from, or tell her she looked like her dad. She wanted what every child deserves, a sense that they belong. Maris and her little cluster of cousins sat at the far end of the main table, whispering and side-glancing in our direction. They weren't even subtle. Maris, just 13 and already fluent in mean girl theatrics, locked eyes with Alara for a moment before muttering something to the girl next to her. They both laughed. Then came the words, "She's not a real cousin anyway." Sharp, clear, loud enough to cut through every conversation around it. A few adults heard it but chose not to react. That kind of cruelty, when ignored, doesn't fade. It spreads. No one stopped it. No one corrected her. No one stood up. I felt the air leave my lungs. I opened my mouth, ready to say something, anything, but nothing came out. My instinct told me to keep the peace. Don't make a scene. Don't give them a reason to whisper more. I looked at Alara. She had frozen. Her hand still clutched her fork, but she wasn't moving. Her eyes didn't blink. Her face didn't crumble. But I could tell. Those words hit deep. "I'm sorry," I whispered. She didn't say anything. She just sat back in her chair and stared down at her plate. Inside, I was burning. But my silence didn't come from weakness. It came from exhaustion, from years of walking on eggshells around people who thought family was a bloodline measured by last names and shared holidays, not love or memory or loss. I didn't speak because I was tired of having to justify our place in a family Derek gave his life to. But Alara wasn't tired. She reached down and unzipped the small purse she insisted on bringing. I thought she just had her lip gloss in there and the book she always carried, but instead she pulled out a photo. It was the one she'd taken from our living room shelf that morning without me noticing. It was her dad, Derek. Standing barefoot on the porch of this very house, holding up a sold sign with the biggest grin I'd ever seen, the day we closed on it together, before we found out I was pregnant. He had written something on the back in his messy scrawl, "First home, the beginning." She held it in her lap for a second, then looked up at me. "Can I show them?" Her voice was quiet but steady. I hesitated. My instinct was to protect her, to say no, to keep her from the sting of more rejection. But something in her eyes told me she wasn't asking for permission. She was asking if I believed she had the right to speak. So I nodded. She stood slowly, photo in hand, and walked toward the center of the dining room. The chatter continued for a few moments until someone noticed her, then someone else. Heads turned, forks paused. It didn't take long before the room fell into that soft, uncertain silence that always comes right before something important is about to happen. She turned the photo toward them and held it up with both hands, her shoulders straight and voice clear. "This is my dad," she said. "His name was Derek Vaughn, and he used to own this house." No one moved. Maris blinked, unsure of what to do with her smirk. Alara looked directly at her. "He was your cousin. And that means I'm your cousin too." Her words didn't shout, they didn't accuse, but they landed like a thunderclap. She wasn't asking to be accepted. She was declaring that she already belonged. I stood up then, slowly, and walked to her side. I didn't need to add anything, not yet. The power of her truth was enough. But as I placed my hand on her back, I could feel it. Something in the room had shifted. She had done what I never could. Alara didn't flinch. She stood there in the middle of that old dining room, surrounded by people twice her size and 3 times her age, holding a wrinkled photo of the father she never met like it was a shield and a sword all at once. And in that moment, the air shifted. It wasn't silent out of awkwardness. It was silent because the truth had just been placed in front of everyone like a mirror, and no one could look away. She looked from face to face, calm and unwavering. "He was your cousin," she said again, more softly this time, "and I'm his daughter, which makes me your family, too." No one spoke. I watched as Aunt Marlene, seated near the head of the main table, slowly removed her glasses and set them down on the tablecloth. Her lips parted as if to say something, but nothing came out. Uncle Ray, the only one who had even tried to smile when we arrived, stared at the photo like he was seeing Derek's face for the first time in years, and Maris, the same niece who had muttered her little line of poison not 10 minutes earlier, sat frozen in her chair, mouth slightly open, cheeks turning red. I didn't speak right away because I didn't want to dilute what Alara had just done. She had said everything I had wanted to say for years, but with more grace, more clarity, and more courage than I'd ever been able to summon. But I could feel every eye slowly shifting to me, waiting to see if I'd follow her lead or shrink back into the quiet role I'd played for so long. So I stepped forward. "Alara wasn't just telling a story," I said, my voice clear. "She was claiming something she's owed, something that was never yours to deny her." I walked over to her and turned the photo around for everyone to see. This was taken on the day Derek and I bought this house. We had just moved in. He was so proud. And a month after this photo was taken, we found out we were having Alara. A few heads dropped. Aunt Marlene looked down at her hands. Uncle Ray finally stood, stepping around the table, walking slowly toward us. "I remember that day," he said. His voice was lower than I remembered, softer. "Derek called me that night, said he was going to build a life here. He was so happy." He looked down at Alara, and for the first time that day, his eyes filled with something that felt like recognition. "You look just like him," he said. Alara gave him a small smile, and I felt the breath I'd been holding for hours finally leave my chest. But not everyone was ready to change. Cousin Lila stood up from her chair, crossing her arms. "It's been 11 years, she said. "Why now? Why show up like this?" I turned to her, not angry, just tired. "Because we were invited, and because ignoring someone doesn't erase who they are." Alara looked up at me, then stepped closer. "I didn't come here to take anything," she said. "I came because I wanted to meet my family. My dad loved this place. I just wanted to know what that love looked like." Her voice cracked a little, but she held herself steady. Something about that broke whatever resistance was left in the room. Aunt Marlene stood up slowly and walked toward us. She took the photo from Alara's hands and studied it. "He really did love this house," she whispered. "He used to bring his tools over every weekend just to fix things that weren't broken." Then she looked at me. "I should have called you. After the funeral, I should have reached out. I just didn't know how." Neither of us cried. We didn't hug. But in her voice was a trembling that felt like truth, and that was enough. "I didn't come here for an apology," I said. "I came because Alara deserves to know where she comes from. She deserves to be seen, not as a guest." as a Vaughn. The photo made its way down the line of hands. Every person who touched it seemed to fall quiet, and when it finally came back to Alara, she tucked it gently back into her purse and returned to her seat. This time, though, no one ignored her. Cousin Jonah passed her a bread basket. Aunt Marlene sat at the edge of our table. Even Maris glanced over and offered a tentative, embarrassed smile. It wasn't a grand apology or a dramatic shift, but it was a start, and it was sparked not by anger, not by confrontation, but by a little girl who knew her worth and wasn't afraid to claim it. The rest of the afternoon moved differently, not faster, not louder, just softer. There was a new texture to the room, like something that had been stiff for years had finally loosened. The kind of shift you only notice when it's been tight for so long, when you finally exhale without realizing you'd been holding your breath. Alara sat back at the table, and this time, no one asked us to move. In fact, Aunt Marlene pulled out the chair beside her and sat down, placing a napkin in her lap like it was the most natural thing in the world. Cousin Jonah leaned over from the next table and asked if Alara wanted to help hand out the dessert plates. She looked at me for reassurance, and when I smiled and nodded, she jumped up to help like she'd been waiting for the invitation all day. As I watched her, something inside me cracked open. Not in a painful way, in a way that made space for pride, for release, for gratitude. This was what I had wanted for her, not validation, not acceptance, just the chance to show them who she was. And she did it. One by one, people began to engage, not just with her, but with me. Uncle Ray brought over a pitcher of sweet tea and filled my glass himself. He didn't say much, just offered a soft, "Derek would have been proud of her." I believed him. But the moment that changed everything didn't come from one of the adults. It came from Maris. She walked up to Alara, holding a plate with 2 slices of chocolate cake. Her hands trembled slightly. She looked nervous, genuinely nervous, and that surprised me. She handed 1 slice to Alara and said, "I'm sorry for what I said earlier. I didn't know. I didn't understand." Alara looked up, searching her face. Then, in a voice that didn't hold anger or judgment, she asked, "Would you have said it if you knew?" Maris blinked. "Number, I don't think I would have." Alara took the plate and gave a small nod. "Okay." And just like that, the wall between them started to fall. It wasn't forgiveness wrapped in a hug. It wasn't magic. But it was real, honest. And in a room full of adults who had failed to speak up, it meant something that the first to step forward was another child. Aunt Marlene stood at the edge of the porch later that evening as the sun dipped behind the trees. She called me over. Her voice was lower than before, less commanding, more human. "I wasn't fair to you," she said. "I let Derek's death close doors instead of opening them. You didn't deserve to raise her alone without this part of him. She didn't deserve to be kept away from this house, from this family." I didn't need an apology, but her words weren't excuses. They were confessions. That mattered more. "I kept this for years," she continued, reaching into her cardigan pocket. She handed me a key, an old one, tarnished but familiar. "It's the original key to the house. I thought maybe one day if Alara ever wanted to come back, it should be here for her." I held the key in my palm, the cool metal pressing against skin that suddenly felt warm. "I don't know if she'll want that," I said quietly. "She might," she answered. "Maybe not now, but one day." I looked across the yard. Alara was on the porch swing, laughing with a group of cousins who had ignored her just hours ago. And yet she sat there as if she'd always been part of them, not forcing it, not performing, just being. That laugh, it sounded like Derek's. Not exactly, close enough that I felt it in my chest. It was then I realized that this wasn't just about claiming a seat at the table. It was about reclaiming a history that had been kept from her, about building something new from the pieces he left behind. As we packed up to leave that evening, Alara asked if she could keep the photo in her purse. "Of course," I said. She looked back at the house, then up at me. "I think he would have been proud of me." I smiled. "He would have been in awe of you." And in that final moment, as we walked down the steps of the house her father once called home, I knew the silence that had once surrounded us was gone, replaced not by noise, but by presence, by connection, by truth. And that was everything. The car ride home, was quiet. Not in the way silence feels when something's wrong, but in the way it feels when something important has ended. Alara stared out the window, the photo of her father resting in her lap, one hand lightly covering it. The sun was starting to set, painting the sky in that soft gold that makes the world look kinder. She didn't say much at first, and I didn't push her to. About halfway down the winding road away from the Vaughn house, she finally spoke. I thought it would feel different. I glanced at her. Different how? She shrugged, still watching the trees pass. I don't know. I thought I'd either feel like part of the family or like I'd never want to go back. But it's kind of both, and neither. I smiled at that because I knew exactly what she meant. Family, real family, is messy. It doesn't always wrap itself neatly in warm hugs or shared traditions. Sometimes it's a knot you have to untangle. Sometimes it's something you have to fight for, even if you shouldn't have to. You don't have to decide how to feel today, I told her. You just did something really brave. And sometimes being brave doesn't feel good right away. It just feels necessary. She nodded, then leaned her head against the window. I thought about what had happened. Not just the photo, not just the silence that followed it, but what came after. The shift, the small acts, Uncle Ray refilling my tea, Aunt Marlene standing beside us instead of behind closed doors, Maris offering more than just words. For years, I'd let silence fill in the blanks of our story. I'd thought it was better not to force anything, but maybe, deep down, I believed that showing up would only confirm that we didn't belong. And I was wrong, because Alara didn't show up to be tolerated. She showed up to be known. And in doing that, she reminded me that identity isn't something people give you. It's something you claim for yourself. In the weeks that followed, a few things began to change. Aunt Marlene sent a box in the mail. Inside were old photos of Derek as a boy, a high school yearbook with notes in the margins, and a letter she'd written but never mailed after his funeral. Alara read it twice. Maris sent a video message through her mom's phone, saying she wanted to learn more about Derek. Alara recorded a response, sitting on the edge of her bed, holding up her favorite photo of him, saying, "This was his favorite hoodie. Mom says he wore it even in the summer." We didn't become part of every group chat or get invited to every Sunday dinner. That wasn't the point. The point was that the story was no longer sealed shut. The silence had been broken. The door had opened and Alara had walked through it on her own terms. One afternoon, a few weeks later, Alara walked into the living room with the key Aunt Marlene had given me. "Do you think I could ever live in that house someday?" she asked. I looked at her, not surprised, but deeply moved. "If that's what you want, yes, it'll always be part of your story." She held the key in her palm and smiled. "Then I'll keep it safe." Watching her, I realized that the moment she stood up in that room and told the truth, her truth, something shifted not just in the family, but in me. I stopped carrying shame for how things had ended. I stopped apologizing, even in my head, for not being enough to make them include us. Because we were never the problem. We were the missing part of the story. And now, it was whole. If this story touched you, even just a little, take a moment to let us know. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been made to feel like you didn't belong? Or has someone stood up for you in a way you'll never forget? I read every comment, and I'd love to hear your story too. If you felt something while watching, if Alara's courage moved you, if this reminded you of someone you love, share this video with them. Sometimes the right story at the right time is all someone needs to feel seen. And if you want more real, honest stories like this, stories about family, about truth, about finding your voice, hit the like button, subscribe, and don't forget to turn on notifications so you don't miss what's coming next. Thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling this with me. And most of all, thank you for being part of the story.